How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. I hope you had a great weekend. The phone number 877-973-7425. I got to begin out of the gate trying to synthesize and analyze this Ukraine situation for you. What the heck is going on? If you hadn't been paying attention, Marco Rubio told a group of senators behind the scenes in a closed-door meeting that he did not like the plan and was not part of the plan, and implied very strongly to them that it was a Russian plan. We know from Bloomberg News that this Ukraine plan is actually a plan that was put forward without a lot of input from anyone in the White House. It was Steve Witkoff sat down with his Russian counterpart, and they did it. And Jennifer Griffin at Fox News and several other reporters have now come out and said that it had the backing of J.D. Vance. And it was the Vance team that was pushing this plan. And now there is an effort among U.S. senators on the Republican side and Republicans in the House, as well as Europeans, to sabotage the president's plan. Things look to be in disarray. And while all of this is happening now, President Xi of China cold called Donald Trump to talk to him about the Taiwanese and how they want to reconstruct and reunite China and Taiwan together. So what is going on here? I want to propose to you something, and just bear with me here, because I can tell you what's happening. I actually have insight into this from a lot of conversations with people in Washington across the board, and I actually can explain this to you. And when you hear me explain it, you're not going to be able to unsee it happening. And I want you to know that they deny it publicly, and they have to. They vigorously deny what I'm about to tell you. But privately, not only do they acknowledge it, but all of the intellectuals that they talk to have pushed them on this idea. So again, I'm going to tell you something, and up front, I want you to know that they will vigorously deny it. They will tell you that I am lying to you and that I'm wrong. But I not only know that I'm right, I've talked enough behind the scenes to know that I'm right, to have been told that I'm right, and to understand why they have to vigorously deny it. So let me tell you what the thinking actually is in the dominant part of Trump world. If you were a nation in decline, could you tell your voters that the nation was in decline? How many of you believe the nation is in decline? Some portion of you do, but most of you don't. What if the leaders in Washington, D.C. believe the nation's in decline? They couldn't campaign on it. Hey, we've got to manage our decline. We're in decline. They can't campaign on that. This is not America leading the world. But they can call it America first, and they can say we're putting our interests ahead of everybody else's interests. See, the growing prevailing consensus among a large segment of the president's advisors, particularly those tied to J.D. Vance, is that we are a nation in decline. We have $39 trillion in debt. There seems to be no way to get out of our debt. Inflation isn't tamed. Congress will not make the hard choices. The American people would vote them out if they made the hard choices. So you can't say we're a nation in decline. You say we're America first, and you manage the decline without acknowledging you believe we're declining. And the thinking, the thought process, the ideas and beliefs behind the scenes within that segment of the Trump administration. And by the way, there's a real divide. Marco Rubio is not in this camp, hence his willingness to try to sabotage the Ukraine deal. But among a lot of the younger guys who are deeply influential within MAGA, they believe we're a nation in decline. They don't believe they can say it. And what they point to is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland after the War of 1812. As the British Empire headed into the 19th century, astride the world, and began at the outer edges of it to be crumbling. The wars that Britain had fought to acquire its empire were very costly. The wars it fought to maintain the empire were more costly. And Britain in the 1800s was becoming a British empire that was financially unsound and insolvent. But no one could admit it because the sun never set on the British Empire, and they were all very proud of it. So the politicians of the day, the foreign policy leaders in particular, had to find a way to manage the decline of the British Empire without acknowledging it, and to show the British Empire was leading at a time it was allowing others to rise because it could not contain them. And the British Empire went from being a globally dominant hegemon to a multilateral, near tripartite system where there were other powerful players. And what did the British do to maintain their empire as long as they could, to maintain their strength as long as they could? They started playing themselves off of other nations. They would cut a deal with France for a little while, and then they'd betray the French and cut a deal with the Germans, and they'd betray the Germans and cut a deal with the Russians, and then they go back to the French. And around the world, the British would bounce back and forth between alliances, every alliance determined to prop up a key portion of the British Empire, and the British sphere of influence in that area, they would dominate. And history judges it as a success, by the way. History thinks the British played a bad hand as well as they could. That thinking has infested part of Trump world. And what they see is a world where China is on the rise, Russia is hungry for more, the Europeans, the Southeast Asians and the like, they're incompetent and broke. So if we divide the world between Russia, China, and the United States, and we take our Western Hemisphere back, Russia can have its sphere of influence in Europe. China can have its sphere of influence down in Africa. And you say, wait, what about the Russian-Chinese alliance? Well, the thinking within the sphere of the White House, and I think they're right on this, is that the Russians and Chinese are only allies by convenience. The Russians and Chinese actually have a multi-hundred-year history of hating each other's guts, so it's not actually a deep alliance. It's just alliance for convenience. In fact, Xi Jinping of China called Donald Trump today to express his regard for Donald Trump helping settle the Ukraine matter. And please, oh please, leave us Taiwan, which the president wants to do, in exchange for them getting out of the Western Hemisphere. That's where all of this heads. It's why Ukraine is intrinsically tied to what's happening in Venezuela, where we have amassed an amount of our flotilla, a major battle group. This is from Fox News.
Should President Trump order strikes against the Maduro regime, there's plenty of firepower in the Caribbean to do it, with about 30% of all deployed American warships, including the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford, now on station. There are over 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles in theater aboard destroyers and U.S. Marines aboard the USS Iwo Jima and other amphibs in the Ready Group. Now, ahead of Thanksgiving, the U.S. military's top officer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Raisin Kane, arrived in Puerto Rico yesterday to meet the forces who are part of Operation Southern Spear. So with General Kane in the region, we'll have to see if Secretary Hegseth follows suit ahead of Thanksgiving. And one thing officials have said is some of this buildup in the Caribbean goes beyond the Maduro regime. It's about getting Russia, China, and Iran out of the Western Hemisphere, guys.
Yes, a little more on this.
Good afternoon, John.
Of course, the
FAA leaks in the press about covert operations inside Venezuela and potentially dropping leaflets over Caracas. This all appears to be an effort by the Trump administration to enter into some kind of psychological operations and psyops against the Maduro regime. Some lawmakers think this goes even bigger. This is about getting Russia and China out of the Western Hemisphere.
We ought to be making sure that our interests are respected in our own hemisphere. That
This is Eric Schmidt from Missouri.
includes having aircraft carriers in our own hemisphere. It also means taking out narco-terrorists who are finding new ways to poison Americans.
John, today is Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro's birthday. Friday, he's celebrated by attending a rally of college students, attendance likely mandatory, in defiance of the buildup of U.S. forces in the Caribbean, where now about 30% of all deployed warships are on station, ready to strike the Maduro regime should they be ordered.
30% of all U.S. warships now in the Western Hemisphere, no longer in the Eastern Hemisphere. Convenient, isn't it? We're watching a realignment of the American world order where dominant forces within the Trump administration no longer believe there is an American-led world order, and they call it America First. And what they actually mean is that our American-led world order is in decline, led by our financial decline, and we have to reprioritize. You can like that or not. This is shaping the thinking in the administration. And what we know now is that Marco Rubio disagrees with that vision and actually believes the United States has it within itself to continue to lead a world order, and that leading that world order gives us economic advantages that would actually cost us greatly. I share his view. We retreat from leading the world. You think we can't afford it. You have the luxury of that belief because you don't appreciate the advantages we get by leading the world order. Our ability to trade on the world stage cheaper than any other nation, our ability to have interest rates and inflation less than anywhere else in the world, all of those things because we lead the world, and giving that up will actually be costly. Rubio behind the scenes, I'm told, working to sabotage this Ukraine plan, but this Ukraine plan has everything to do with getting the Russians and the Chinese out of the United States, essentially telling Vladimir Putin, we'll give you land you did not conquer if you stop helping Venezuela. And by the way, when Venezuela falls, that means Cuba falls, because Venezuela is the last country seriously propping up the Cubans. Russia and China have cut back their aid. It solidifies a Western Hemisphere for the United States at the expense of the rest of the world. That's what's happening. That's it. It is this belief that they cannot say it, they cannot admit it, and they must vociferously deny it, that we're a nation in decline. But privately, they view us as where the British were in the 19th century, with their empire beginning to show signs of economic, financial, and geopolitical stress and strain that could not be maintained. And the British move to a mitigation strategy. That appears to be where this is headed. That's the prevailing wisdom within the Trump administration. That's what's going into what we see on the world stage. That is why Marco Rubio is publicly being supportive of this Ukraine plan, privately trying to sabotage it. And it has also got the European leadership working to sabotage it. Here's what we know on this Ukraine plan. The president was caught off guard, did not know it was being negotiated, was presented with it and gave his blessing to it without having explained to him the full implications of what we would be agreeing to. And if you want the final perspective on why it's a bad idea, in fact, a number of conservative leaders, including Tony Perkins at the Family Research Center, have stood up to blast the idea. The the British military chief of staff said, if you put a snail on the border of Russia and Ukraine 2 years ago and had it march in a straight line into Ukraine, the snail will have made it further today into Ukraine than the Russians have. And he's right, by the way. That's actually a guaranteed certainty. If you don't believe me, You can get in your ChatGPT and ask it how fast a snail moves on average and plot it out on the Ukraine-Russian border, and you'll see the snail made deeper inroads over the last few years than Russia has. And now we're committing to Russia that they can have thousands of square miles of Ukraine they haven't conquered in exchange for what? Well, for getting out of the Western Hemisphere. The problem is, as these people will soon realize, you can't trust the Russians because Vladimir Putin, he's an old Soviet KGB hand. It is kind of appropriate that Marjorie Taylor Greene has decided that she will retire on January 5th next year. She'll resign from Congress 2 days after her pension kicks in. Now, it's not a big pension. It's $10,000 a year. When she gets to age 65, it's standard for members of Congress. Ron DeSantis is in about the same situation. She put up with the nonsense that long. Might as well give her a little bit of something. By the way, this morning I wrote it was $10,000 a month, which was a typo and my mistake. It's $10,000 a year. But I also think it's actually deeply appropriate that Marjorie Taylor Greene is resigning on January 5th because it will be the 5th anniversary of Marjorie Taylor Greene convincing Georgians not to go vote in a special election on January 5th, 2021 that handed the United States Senate to the Democrats. Marjorie Taylor Greene was deeply, deeply influential in telling particularly people in her district that they should not go vote because it was going to be stolen because Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, hadn't called a special session to change laws that would have been enjoined by the federal courts because there's longstanding precedent in the middle of an election. You can't change the election rules. It would have been applied. It would have been messy. It wouldn't have worked. But she convinced people it would have been. And her district in particular saw the lowest rate of turnout from the general election to the special election. She, in her words, cost the Republicans the United States Senate. And now, on the anniversary of the day she cost the United States Republican Party the Senate, she will step aside. She's a bully. She can punch, but she doesn't like being punched back. Good riddance. Let me tell you about the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. It works great to rid noxious odors like those left behind by a near former member of Congress. You can get 3 of them and save $200 and get them for less than $200 at EdenPureDeals.com. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ERIC3, ERICK, the number 3. They make a great stocking stuffer. You can hold them in your hand. They're small. They're portable. You can plug it in with USB cords. You can plug it into the wall. It gets rid of dust. It gets rid of pollen. It gets rid of 99.9% of bacteria and viruses. And also, it wipes out every odor. It generates ozone, and ozone touches other ionized particles in the air called odors and wipes them out. No odor can stand up to it. It works well. I use it. I keep one in my travel bag. They're small and portable. I've used it in rental cars and elsewhere. EdenPureDeals.com. The discount code is ERIC3, ERICK3 at EdenPureDeals.com. You can wipe out odors, smoke odors, litter box odors, pet odors, dirty diaper odors, cooking odors, you name it. It just works. EdenPureDeals.com. Get 3 of them, save $200, get them for less than $200. Greetings, conversationalists. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number, 877-973-7425. One of the things I have had to learn over my years as a radio show, talk show host, you guys get used to me being on the radio. You forget the people I know and come into contact with, the conversations I have, the understanding I have about certain scenarios with stuff that is oftentimes publicly denied. And you get mad at me and you say, no, this isn't so because so-and-so publicly denied it. And you take their word for it. And then it turns out I was right. And I have over time had to settle for not really pointing out I was right about things because you don't like that either. The host has to have a level of humility. Can't point out when you're right because it makes the people who were wrong mad that you're rubbing their nose in it. There have been plenty of times I have been wrong. People love to rub my nose in it. But when I point out I've been right about substantive things, they're like, oh, move on. I just like to point out, for the last number of years, I have said then I am very certain a lot of the online horde that gets the right and the left whipped into a frenzy is a foreign trolling exercise. Turns out I was right. Elon Musk on Twitter, and by the way, just so you know, I refuse to call it X. I think it's a stupid name for the platform. I think everyone knows it as Twitter. People still say they tweet, they retweet, they subtweet. Twitter was a good brand, and Elon Musk may be a genius at a lot of stuff, but I think his branding exercises is stupid. I think that he is a great engineer. I think Elon Musk is a great computer programmer. I think he clearly knows what he's doing to be the richest person on the planet, but he's also not very good at branding exercises. You've got a known brand called Twitter, and you change it to X on a whim. It was stupid. Nobody sub-X's. Nobody re-X's. People retweet. They subtweet. They quote tweet. Nobody quote X's. It was just a stupid branding. I refuse to go along with it, and I still call it Twitter because it's a useful name, and you know what I'm talking about, as opposed to X, which could be a letter of the alphabet. It could be an X-ray. It could be a social media site with a stupid name. I digress. He unveiled a new feature on Twitter, and you can now see accounts, where they are tweeting from, where they were started. Interestingly enough, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, they're tweeting from the United States, but they downloaded the Twitter app in Turkey. Republicans Against Trump is an account with about 1 million followers. They're not inside the United States. A number of white supremacist accounts that have gone viral with segments of the right. Turns out they're in India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Nigeria. Now, what's actually happening here? There are a couple of things going on you should know about, and one of which is a very simple matter of economics. Accounts with blue check marks, which many of these have, you pay for your check mark, you get it. I earned mine for being a famous and influential person. Didn't have to pay. You can pay, get your blue check mark. You're verified, and now you can make money. And that's actually the easiest answer for a lot of this stuff. Is it turns out pitting Americans against Americans for sport makes people in Nigeria a lot of money. A lot of the accounts, Nigerian accounts, Indian accounts, Indonesian accounts, and these are monetized accounts. They're whipping people into a frenzy with viral stuff, and they turn out not to be American. And they're doing it not because they want to stir up sentiment in the United States, but because that sentiment already exists and they can profit off of it. You making $150, $200 a month on Twitter, that's chump change. In Nigeria, it's a lot of money. And so they're doing it. But it's not just that and there. There are some where it's clearly a motivation for discord in this country. You've got a lot of accounts that are pro-Palestinian accounts. In fact, one guy claimed to be on the ground eyewitness. He was quoted in the BBC. He was quoted, I think, in the New York Times. He was quoted on MSNBC, quoted all over the Western press for the horrors in Gaza that Israel was doing. Turns out he tweets from Ireland. Seriously. There is a pro-Palestinian account that was providing play-by-play action on the ground in Gaza. The guy wasn't even there. He was in Ireland the whole time. And yet his tweets would go viral on the left to demonize Israel. There are a lot of accounts from Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, a lot of pro-Palestinian accounts in Egypt and also Europe. There are a lot of white supremacist accounts in Eastern Europe that amplify Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others. And they do want to sow discord on the right. They want to divide the right. By the way, you should know this prior topic about how there are some within Vance World who believe America's in decline. They can't say it, but they got to start treating the world as if it's so. A lot of the loudest accounts over the years that have advanced similar theories and that have built up robust followings on the right they happen to be Chinese-run accounts. In other words, a lot of the discord that we see online on social media has come from overseas, but that is not to absolve Americans who fell for it. The seeds of anti-Semitism were sown by accounts in Turkey and Egypt and Indonesia, India, Nigeria, but those seeds were watered by people like Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and others. The anti-Semites abroad couldn't have gained traction in the United States without Americans buying into it. The white supremacist so-called Groyper accounts, the Groypers are followers of Nick Fuentes. Perhaps they could have gotten a lamer name, but that was the one they chose. And a lot of the voices who have amplified them are foreign voices. What's so interesting here, actually, is that Nick Fuentes supposedly has a large, massive following, and it appears a lot of that massive following, not all of it, but a lot of it is actually online voices from abroad. It's not actually Americans. That's not to say there aren't American young men who have given the following and the dominance embraced it, but that's kind of the funny thing here, is a lot of the people who have embraced these ideas were induced to do so by foreigners running social media accounts with multi-million person followings and claiming to be Americans, and they're not. What is that, the Ian Miles Chong or whatever guy? I can't remember his name. He posts all the time. He's pro-Donald Trump, and here's why I voted for Donald Trump. He lives in Malaysia. Now, I've known that one for a while, and I've told people that. People are like, you can't be sure. You don't know. Now, I knew because he outed himself one time by accident, and sure enough, it is confirmed. He lives in Malaysia and is now doubling down, pretending it's not true when everyone knows it's true, and that's what the data says. It's just interesting to see so many of these people on the right who are Americans who have been induced to believe evil that was generated by foreign governments and foreigners designed to divide us. They knew what they were doing. They made a lot of money off of it. So if you don't know, you can monetize your Twitter accounts. My account, I've got a blue check marked account. I mean, I don't make a ton of money off of it. Although I will tell you, Elon Musk retweeted me in October, earned me like $1,000 on Twitter, and then it crashed back to about $100. But if I lived in Nigeria or India and I was getting $100 off of Twitter just by tweeting, that would actually be a pretty good living in parts of the third world. And that's what's happening. At the same time, as well, these people induced others to divide us. And there's no excuse for them. But also, there's no excuse for the number of Americans who actually are Americans who fell for the nonsense, who wanted to believe the nonsense, oftentimes lies. They wanted to believe in the hate. They wanted to believe in the anti-Semitism. They wanted to believe they were on the righteous side. And they believed. And they became anti-Semites because they saw online everyone else was, I might as well be too. Or they wanted to become a white supremacist. Everyone else online was, so I will be too. They were led into it and they embraced it. They were malcontented voices from abroad cashing in. And Americans fell for it and bought it. The foreigners planted the seeds and the voices here at home watered the seeds. And now we all have to reap the harvest. Unfortunately. There is breaking news happening right now I've got to get to. The judge in the James Comey case has dismissed the case. It's just happened. It is without prejudice, and that's a key term. Without prejudice means it can be refiled. But let me read to you the conclusion and the order. The appointment of Ms. Halligan as interim U.S. attorney violated 28 U.S.C. 546 and the Appointments Clause of the U.S. Constitution. All actions flowing from Ms. Halligan's defective appointment, including securing and signing Mr. Comey's indictment, were unlawful exercises of executive power and are hereby set aside. The Attorney General's attempts to ratify Ms. Halligan's actions were ineffective and are set aside. Mr. Comey's motion to dismiss the indictment is granted. The indictment is dismissed without prejudice. The power to appoint an interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 546 during the current vacancy lies with the district court until a U.S. attorney is nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. It is ordered. That is the breaking now news that James Comey's indictment has been dismissed. Now, interestingly enough, the judge did not dismiss the indictment based on the screw-up with the grand jury. And by the way, the Trump administration is lucky, actually. The Trump administration is lucky. Why is the Trump administration lucky the judge dismissed James Comey's indictment based on the appointment of the U.S. attorney being invalid? Because had he invalidated the indictment based on the screw-up with the grand jury having signed off on an indictment they didn't see, he would have dismissed it with prejudice, meaning they wouldn't have been allowed to refile it. It was such a screw-up. But because he invalidated the appointment of the U.S. attorney, all of what happened before the grand jury is moot. It's all about the U.S. attorney should have never had the power to do what she did. Therefore, the case has got to be thrown out and a new U.S. attorney can revisit the matter. The judge is actually helping the Trump administration by allowing this to be dismissed without prejudice. Given the screw-up before the grand jury, had they just done the screw-up before the grand jury, it more likely than not would have been dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could not ever be refiled as a punishment for that screw-up. But by saying the U.S. attorney was improperly placed into the role of U.S. attorney, therefore all of her actions are rendered invalid, it allows the Trump administration a second bite of the apple. This is breaking news happening right now, the James Comey indictment being thrown out of court by a federal judge in Virginia. And I have told you to expect that to come. I told you that it was undoubtedly going to happen. It was very clear to me it was going to happen based on the judge's aggressive questioning of the interim U.S. attorney who he has decided was unlawfully named U.S. attorney. So that throws everything out and they can restart the process if they want to. The federal judge has also now just dismissed the lawsuit against the Attorney General of New York, Tish James. If you're just tuning in, it's breaking news. A federal judge has dismissed the charges against former FBI Director James Comey and now against New York State Attorney General Tish James. Without prejudice is key. Without prejudice is a legal term that means a case can be refiled. If the court is prejudiced against the case, it means it cannot be refiled. So by saying it's dismissed without prejudice, it allows the cases to be refiled. Now, the basis for throwing out the cases is that Lindsay Halligan, who was purported to be the interim U.S. attorney, has been ruled an invalid appointment. Why? So there is a federal law in place that says the president appoints someone to be U.S. attorney. That person can serve, and there can be an acting U.S. attorney while someone's confirmation is going through, but that acting U.S. attorney expires after a certain number of days. And if the president has not appointed a new person to be acting attorney general or acting U.S. attorney by the time that role expires, then the U.S. district court for that district does. So this is the Eastern District of Virginia, and he appointed someone to be U.S. attorney there. That person's time was up. He had not appointed a second person and then said, wait, it's Lindsay Halligan. It's Lindsay Halligan. She's going to be it. And this judge is saying, no, you didn't do it by the time you were supposed to do it. So the U.S. Federal judge gets to do it. And sorry, Charlie. That's the basis for the dismissal of these two lawsuits. And I got to tell you, one of the things I've been impressed with the Trump administration is how quickly they have been able to move on a number of issues legislatively, with executive orders, things like that, but also how screwed up a lot of the confirmation process has been. And you can't just blame the slow pace of the Senate, because the Democrats have always had tools. The minority party always has tools to be obstacles to confirmations, but they just kind of bungled a number of these U.S. attorney appointments, expecting cakewalks where there weren't, in a large part because people around the president convinced the president to put in allies who weren't very competent, and the U.S. Senate Republicans balked at those appointments. That's ultimately what has happened here, is a lot of these people were not good enough to get confirmed by U.S. Senate Republicans, let alone the Democrats. And so the whole situation got dragged out, and now we are where we are, where these two cases the president wanted, have been thrown out by a federal judge because he ruled that the interim U.S. attorney was not actually the interim U.S. attorney. All right, we got to move on. But first, let me tell you about Americans for Prosperity. They are pushing for common sense conservative solutions around the country in all 50 states, and they'd love to have you on board. They can keep you really informed about what's going on down to your local level. They push things like the REINS Act in states, which would rein in state bureaucracies. They push school choice in states. They help advance school choice propositions at the local level. They support the president's tax cuts. In fact, they were the largest grassroots group to mobilize to get the president's tax cuts passed. And they support things like permitting reform in Washington, D.C., boring things that actually make a lot of difference to our lives. They're common sense conservative reforms. They are around the country in every state. They'd love to get you involved, even if you want to stay informed. But if you want to knock on doors and get out the vote, you want to talk to your members of Congress or state legislatures, they teach you how to do it to make you very effective. So go to afpvolunteer.com today, afpvolunteer.com. Get involved with Americans for Prosperity. Start fighting for common sense conservative reforms across the nation with them, and let's get a better future for this country. afpvolunteer.com.